their troops, their settlements, and their people from all these various colonies they had set up over a period of time, right? So decolonization refers to the withdrawal of the colonial project, the colonial prospect. All right. So why did they do it? We'll come to that in the next part of our presentation. So first we are going to look at what is decolonization. So this happened when these colonized countries, right, they got the right to govern their own affairs. That is, they became free and they were given the freedom to rule their own countries. So either they were given it or they had to fight for it. For instance, India, we had to fight for it. And then see, this attempt to govern by the colonies were not always successful. You know, there had been different reasons why they did not become successful, whatever, but we are not going to get into the details about it. All right. And then when you look at countries like India, there were these acts of resistance. You had this Indian national movement for freedom. So these were acts of resistance by the indigenous inhabitants, that is the native people, and they were against these colonizers. And in some countries, you know, their own people, the white people themselves, that is members of the European communities themselves, were unhappy about the whole colonial project. They did not like it. So they were very, very vocal against their own governments also. So when we're talking about the Indian freedom movement, it's not only the Indians, but also there were white people who were unhappy about it and wanted this East India Company, the British governance to stop. Yeah. So now, according to history, when you look at it, we can say there are three stages or three periods of decolonization. So the first, it is divided into three. The first one was, relating to America. That is, American colonies. They became independent, and you have the Declaration of the American Independence in the late 18th century, 1776 to be precise. So that was the first stage. We'll be looking at all these in detail. And then you have the autonomy and the independence of the settlers of dominion. Settlers, as in, we'll come to that in detail. What do you mean by the settlers and the settlement and all? So you have countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, all of them becoming free by the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the first decade of the 20th century. That's a second round, the second stage. And the third one is you have the achievement of independence due to the freedom fightings or the struggle within many countries. So you had this anti-colonial nationalism and military struggle. So in places like India, India is one of the foremost examples of the third stage. These things happened in the post uh, World War II period, that is after 1945. So there are three stages. The first one is concerning America, American colonies, American independence. The second one is all these countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they became free. We're going to talk about that. That's the second stage. And the third one is the countries that achieved independence after the Second World War due to the fights, the national movement that was happening in their own countries. Now we're moving on to the first stage. So the first stage is stage one. Stage one is that laws of American colonies and Declaration of American Independence. We have studied all this, right? American independence in 1776, Declaration of Human Rights and Civil Liberties, all those things that we have studied in our social sciences. So American Revolution, it refers, and what is this? This all about American colonies, right? America was a huge colony, huge colony with so many, you could say, little countries. So, around the year 1775 to 1783, uh, 13 of these settlements or 13 of these colonies which were under Great Britain. See, America was also a colony. Please remember that, right? America was also a colony which was kind of ruled over by the Great Britain, right? So, 13 of these little states, they fought against the rule of Great Britain. They wanted independence. So all these North American colonies, they won political independence and they together formed the United States of America. They became free and declared themselves as one independent country, the United States of America. And there was war. bloodshed, a lot of a loss of life, estrangement between uh, the Britishers, the British elite, the British crown, and then the colonies, and then these colonies, they were very unhappy. Like, why? Because they wanted independence, and all these men actually, they had traveled from Great Britain, and they had gone and settled in America. But then but then Great Britain, it continued to rule over whatever was happening in America, which was not acceptable to the people settled in America, because it was okay in the initial period when they were very new to this colony. They did not know what to do. At that time, okay, it was welcome. But after some time, they wanted to assert their own independence. They wanted to rule it according to their own strategies. So this led to a lot of tension between them, and then there was this all out war between the colonies of America, the United Colonies of America, and Great Britain, which is referred to as the War of American Independence, American Revolutionary War. So you can just have a look at some iconic paintings about these wars. Sorry. The first one, it's the surrender of Lord Cornwallis. It's a canvas painting. Lord Cornwallis was one of the British generals. So in this American war, he had lost it and he had surrendered. This is actually what the Britishers did to the people in the colonies. It was really brutal. It was not that American independence was easily won. They really had to fight it out. It was so brutal. Cities were set on fire. People were killed, beheaded. Children, women. You know, no clemency was shown to anyone. See, look at the third painting. It's about cities being set on fire. You can see the people in orange dresses. They are the British soldiers. So beating up the civilians, the common people, setting whole townships and cities on fire. So they tried everything, but then the united might of the Americans saw to it that they won the battle. So that was the first stage. All right. Now the second stage is the Statute of Westminster in 1931. See, the Statute of Westminster came much later. It was nothing but a rule, or you could say something written on paper, which granted liberty, freedom to countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. So this said that all these colonies or settlements are now free from the rule of Great Britain. So now, see, countries like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, South Africa, these were places wherein a large number of European people, they went and settled there. And we know what happened in all these countries. They displaced, they violently destroyed the settlements of the indigenous or the local natives, right? And these people, they overtook the population. That's why now when you talk about Canada, where are the original Canadians? They're very few, and they're living in some, remote island in some remote places. And all the mainland, that is, you talk about Ontario or you talk about Australia, you have all the major cities. They're all populated by white people. So who are these white people? They are actually originally people from Great Britain who went in large number, who went and settled in these countries. So these people, they are called settlers. So once they went and settled there, they made the country their own. They pushed away the indigenous or the local people, and they started living in those countries. So in the initial stages, in the initial so many years, these countries were also controlled by the British crown. They had to pay some taxes. They had to obey whatever, the queen or the king of England would say. So they had to pay some kind of subservience, and they had to pay some kind of a homage to Great Britain. And Great Britain was like, a queen mother, or you could say uh, that overarching protector over these countries. So they were not independent. So what happened was, after a couple of years, or once they became in kind of settled in these countries and became very comfortable, they wanted freedom from Great Britain. So they became free, and in many of these countries there was no what you call the typical battle or anything. They made their unwillingness to continue with this association with Great Britain known to the crown, and then finally Great Britain decided, and it was because of which they passed this Statute of Westminster, that is the rule, the Treaty of Westminster in 1931, which said that these countries are now free and they can rule the country as they would like to. See the years in which these countries became free. Canada 1867, Australia 1900, New Zealand 1907, South Africa 1909, Ireland 1931. So, what is the Statute of Westminster? It's an act passed by the British Parliament giving independence to the dominions. See, these countries, they're called dominions. Please remember these words: dominions of Canada, Australia, South Africa, and New Zealand, Ireland, and Newfoundland. Newfoundland is, you could say, a province close to France. So these places became free during the second stage of decolonization. Now, coming to the third stage, we've already talked about it, wherein these countries they became independent after the Second World War, and this happened because of this indigenous or the local anti-colonial nationalism and military struggle. So India and Pakistan in 1947, Sri Lanka 1948, and then you have these countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, then Hong Kong. Hong Kong was given back to China in 1997, and we know Hong Kong is still kind of simmering because they are not very happy to go with China. And why? Because China is very authoritarian, but it belonged to China once upon a time, but then it was under the rule of the British for a long time. It was only in 1997 that Hong Kong was in a way given liberty or freedom from the British rule and given to China. But then Hong Kong continued to enjoy special status. Special status like what had happened in you could say Jammu and Kashmir. We know is a, it used to enjoy some kind of special status like that. Hong Kong also had that kind of a autonomy. It was an autonomous government and all. But now we know that in the recent times, what is happening in Hong Kong? China is trying to um, assert its power over Hong Kong, with which the people are not at all happy. Okay, that's a current political scenario. But then Hong Kong till 1997 was a colony. Uh, Reasons are very obvious why these states or these countries stopped colonizing. Why? Because the growth of nationalist movements in all these countries, settler colonies and settled colonies. What are the settler colonies? Settler colonies are places like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, where these people went and stayed in large numbers, wherein the country almost became white. The whole demographic characteristic was changed. Those kind of places are called settler colonies. Settled colonies are wherein you had smaller groups of white people going and staying, like Burma, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka. These are settled colonies. All right. So in these places, there was this nationalist movement wherein they wanted freedom, so they resisted the colonial authority, which led to freedom struggle and then ultimately being given freedom. And then we know during the World War, the two World Wars were actually a drain on the economy of all the superpowers. They became, you can't call them poor, but then financially unstable because most of their resources had to be pumped into the war. So there was this decline of the economic power of Britain. And then you had the emergence of new superpowers like America and Russia during that time. America and Russia. So America was once upon a time a settlement, if you remember, right? It was a colony, but then now you have America becoming a superpower along with Russia, and then they were also kind of pressurizing Great Britain. which made Great Britain to kind of slowly give up their claim over these colonies. And again, maintaining and administering the colonies was a very, very expensive affair because the staff, um, the soldiers, the whole administrative, machinery, it had to be paid the salaries, right? These people were on salary. So obviously, a huge amount was required for maintaining and administering the colonies in different parts of the world, so it became economically unviable for Britain. Because Britain was already becoming weak financially after the World War, and then this was an additional burden. It was an additional burden on the exchequer of Great Britain. So because of all these reasons, they understood that it's better that give freedom to these countries, and then recall or call all these administrating staff and the army back to their own motherland. So this led to the decolonization. So it actually speeded up the whole decolonizing process. So by the end of 1950s and 60s and all, almost all the countries in the world were freed. So you have exceptions like Hong Kong, which continued to be under the imperial power till 1997. Has this sunk into you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So there are three stages, there are three periods, and then the first one is about the American